The light that day seemed denser than usual. There was no breeze in Babylon, only the heat rising from the stones, as though the earth still remembered the man who had ruled it with an iron fist and an architect's hands. It was a day of homage, but unlike noisy rituals or theatrical processions, the city whispered memories in every corner. Guards stood before the Ishtar gate, still as imposing as on the day it was completed, and even the youngest avoided speaking loudly near it. It was as if everyone instinctively knew this was the day everything must be recalled. There was no royal decree, no festivity. Yet the elders knew, the priests knew. Even the most skeptical merchants seemed to respect it. On that day, the name of Nebuchadnezzar II hovered over the city like a shadow no one wished to dispel. The smell of incense from Esagila, the temple of Marduk, cut through the dry air with oppressive density. And there, amid broad corridors and columns that touched the sky, the whispers began. Old priests, hollow-eyed and trembling-handed, spoke as one reliving an old wound. They remembered the first day they saw him command. A young general with intense eyes, returning from the Battle of Carchemish covered in glory and blood. They had seen his banners emerge from the Euphrates mist while Egyptian soldiers fled in panic, throwing down their weapons. It was 605 BCE, and the world would never be the same. He had crushed Egypt. There, before the gods, that boy ceased to be Nabopolassar's son and became the new hammer of the East. And everyone knew there was no turning back. The memory of the victory at Carchemish was still told in the same detail. The dust kicked up by horses' hooves, the muffled screams of Egyptians when they realized they were trapped, and Nebuchadnezzar's expression as Pharaoh Necho retreated like a wounded dog. He did not celebrate with euphoria. He was not that type. He merely looked to the horizon as if the battle were just another rung. Scribe who accompanied him recorded that he sat in silence for hours afterward, atop a mound of broken shields, while the blood of the defeated trickled along the riverbank. That same day came news of his father's death. Nabopolassar had died in Babylon, and the throne was now his. Nebuchadnezzar did not waver. He left the army with his generals and marched back alone, crossing unsettled lands to ensure no one mistook him for weak. He knew his brother, Nabushehr, was ready to try something, but there was no struggle. On arrival, the people received him as though they already knew who ruled, and thus began one of the longest, most feared reigns in the region's history. The day went on with such memories surfacing in the most unlikely places. In a tent near the spice market, a one-eyed veteran told curious youths about the march towards Syria. He said Nebuchadnezzar didn't need to shout to be obeyed. When he stayed silent too long, it was worse. Fear lay in the silence. He recalled, when they besieged Tyre and Sidon. Months, sometimes years of siege. Yet no one deserted, because they knew failure meant no mercy. He'd have traitors impaled beside the walls just to remind everyone what happened to those who fell back, the old man said, spitting on the ground and adjusting the cloth over his face. The youths listened quietly, each word heavier than the last. Glory and brutality in the same tale. And that day in Babylon, everyone seemed to feel its weight at once. As the sun reached its height, shadows of gigantic buildings shrank, and the stones grew so hot no one dared touch them bare-skinned. Near the entrance of Nabu's temple, a group of scribes spoke softly, recalling how the king had invested in knowledge as a weapon of power. Nebuchadnezzar restored entire libraries, ordered decrees carved on tablets in meticulous detail, and demanded everything be catalogued and preserved. He was obsessed with permanence. One recounted the king personally visiting scribes to check the records. He knew more of Assyrian kings' genealogy than many priests in Nineveh, said an elder. Yet despite such zeal for record and culture, what lingered most in collective memory was destruction. Jerusalem. The name hung among them like an old scar. Some hesitated to pronounce it, as if the mere mention could summon the day the holy city was reduced to rubble. Early afternoon, while the heat weighed like a suffocating blanket, a man of Judah, one of the exiles, sat near a canal, singing an ancient melody, almost whispering. He had survived Jerusalem's fall. His eyes met no one's, only the still water. Many passed him in silence, none interrupted. Most knew the story, few dared hear it again. When Nebuchadnezzar's army invaded Jerusalem for the last time in 586 BCE, it differed from anything before. There was resistance, of course. King Zedekiah tried to escape by night through the fields but was captured. His sons were killed before his eyes, then his own eyes gouged. He was led blind to Babylon. It marked everyone. Even veteran soldiers said they had never felt such weight entering a conquered city. The memory of that siege remained vivid. Nearly 2 full years Jerusalem was encircled. The Babylonians set camps, raised assault towers, dug trenches, and cut off all supplies. Inside the walls, hunger became routine. Children died quietly. Mothers shared crumbs and dirty water. The Judean army, weaker each day, tried to keep morale with prayers and sacrifices at the temple. But the temple fell too. When Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers entered, there was no mercy. They destroyed the palace, the noble quarters, and finally reached the heart, Solomon's temple. They took everything of value, gold utensils, sacred items, Torah scrolls, then set it ablaze. The sky stayed black for 3 days with smoke, and survivors were chained, forced to walk to Babylon across desert and shame. It was the start of exile, and many listening that day were children or grandchildren of those torn from the promised land. In the city center near the main ziggurat, traders spoke of another side of Nebuchadnezzar few readily recognized. The architect. The Babylon standing there was not by chance. He rebuilt it almost from scratch. He ordered walls wide enough for chariots to ride side by side atop them, canals cutting through the city easing commerce, and avenues leading straight to temples. And of course, the famous hanging gardens. No one knew exactly where they were. Some said they didn't exist, yet others swore they'd seen them. Terraces draped in green, palms sprouting from nowhere, water flowing between columns, as though the Median mountains had been brought there just to console his wife. It was the same man who ordered massacres and built wonders, unsettling everyone. Later, as day darkened, whispers took a new shape. They were no longer only memories of wars and constructions. Now they spoke of what many avoided: madness. Stories spread, some fearful, some mocking, of a strange period in Nebuchadnezzar's life. He supposedly collapsed, lost reason. An old gardener said he saw it with his own eyes. The once proud king roaming the courtyards dirty, disheveled, like an animal. He ate grass, slept on damp ground, and no one dared stop him. Guards lacked orders. Priests had no idea what to do. It was as if the gods had touched his mind, stripping him of sanity for a time. It lasted days, perhaps weeks. No one dared record it officially, but there were marks in corridors, patches of earth where he lay, roots torn out by his own hands, a king reduced to a beast. Then suddenly he returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. He resumed the throne, spoke clearly, reclaimed control as though he'd merely slept a few hours. No one questioned it. No one dared mention it in his presence. But everyone knew. And that specific night, amid crackling torches and the muffled sound of distant ritual drums, it was impossible not to recall. Some said it was divine punishment. Others, the weight of glory. But he was never the same. From then on, his words were more measured, his eyes deeper, his decrees harsher. Babylon prospered even more, as though the city absorbed that madness and turned it into strength. And despite the bright blue stones of the Ishtar Gate, the memory of that dark time still hung in the air. From the top of Marduk's ziggurat, the wind began to blow harder, carrying fine dust and heavy memories. Up there one could see the whole city, wide streets, canals snaking through districts, orange torchlight spreading. A young priest in training climbed up that late afternoon, as he often did when trying to understand what elders called the King's Days. While he gazed at the monumental northern gate, he listened to echoes of the past, echoes needing no words. It was said that in Nebuchadnezzar's last years he trusted no one, ordered counselors killed for the slightest suspicion, his paranoia growing each season. Yet still the city grew. It was as though the hand that destroyed with cruelty was the same that upheld glory with precision. His Babylon was not merely a capital. It was the reflection of a man's mind who knew absolute power and stared straight into the abyss. In the artisans' quarter, an old potter recounted how he once received a direct order from the palace to produce 1,000 plaques inscribed to the gods. He worked day and night, and on delivery was rewarded with enough gold to buy an entire house. But a single crooked detail on one plaque cost another craftsman, his colleague, his life at the main gate. The same hand that gives, takes, he muttered, eyes fixed on the clay he kneaded. Nebuchadnezzar's reign was that. Precision, grandeur, and terror side by side, every day. And on that day of remembrance in Babylon, it felt all still alive, as if turning a corner one might meet him, watching everything, silent, resolute, ready to judge. When night finally fell, there was no celebration, but a quiet tension in the air, as if Babylon remembered that its glory had come at a high price, and that someday the bill would be due. A group of veterans, seated by an inner wall, talked about the reign's end. They recalled learning of Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BCE. There was no public mourning, no mass lament. People fell silent. Many didn't know whether to be grateful or afraid of what would follow, and they were right to fear. His successor Marduk lasted little. He was weak, indecisive, and was overthrown in a plot. The empire began to crack from within, and enemies outside saw it. What Nebuchadnezzar had forged with an iron fist, his heirs let slip through their fingers. One soldier said something that hushed the others. I think he knew it would all crumble. He told how, in the king's final weeks, the decrees grew shorter, his gaze more distant, as if he no longer expected continuity, as if he had done what he needed, and that was enough. The body was buried with full pomp, surrounded by offerings, precious metals, eternal inscriptions. But none there, those time-scarred men, believed his soul rested. Some said he still walked temple corridors at dawn. Others swore they heard his voice in sandstorms. Perhaps it was just the weight of the past. Or perhaps you cannot truly bury a man who shaped the fate of entire nations. That night, the stars over Babylon looked different. Motionless, colder, as though the sky too watched in silence. In the Ilusi, oldest part of town, where few structures survived time, a crowd gathered around a storyteller. He was no priest or scribe, just a firm-voiced, sunburned man who traveled now and then bringing tales from across the former empire. He told, in low measured voice, how Cyrus's Persians reached Babylon's gates years after Nebuchadnezzar's death, in 539 BCE. There was no war. The gates were opened from within. The people, tired of oppression and instability, accepted the invaders almost with relief. Cyrus's soldiers marched through without resistance. Reaching Marduk's temple, they respected the rituals. Babylon wasn't burned, yet it was never the same. The empire ended there. Nebuchadnezzar's name still carved in stone. But the world had moved on. Someone in the audience asked quietly, "And the exiles?" The man nodded and continued. Yes, many Jews torn from their land during Jerusalem's siege were allowed to return. Cyrus let them rebuild the temple, return to their city. But the exiles' mark remained. Songs once sung in the fields were carried along and still echo in their traditions. They did not forget the destruction. They did not forget who commanded it. For the Jews, Nebuchadnezzar became a symbol of judgment, pain, distance from God. Yet to other peoples he was still the king who defeated Egypt, humbled Tyre, turned a forgotten city into world capital. He was all that at once, hence so hard to define. In that attentive circle no one could decide whether to honor or fear him. As night deepened, ceremonial drums fell silent, and a profound quiet spread along Babylon's broad avenues. It was as though the city itself held its breath. A few lamps still burned near the Ishtar gate, casting wavering shadows over reliefs of gods and mythical beasts. A lone priest ran his hand over the glazed bricks, as if touching relics of a time that would never return. He knew where the original restoration marks lay, subtle lines only an expert saw. He never hid the power he had. He whispered, though no one was near. He wanted to be remembered. And he would be, but not as he intended. Future generations would not see only the builder. They would see the conqueror, the destroyer, the king who went mad, who knelt in the mud like a beast, who made kings weep and priests tremble. In distant districts, far from temples and markets, silence filled homes. Families who had not even lived in his days still told stories by small fires, as though survival instructions. Never challenge a king's pride, they said. Never forget what he did to those who resisted. And even there, so far from the center, people looked to the sky, trying to understand why that name still weighed so heavily. Nebuchadnezzar was remembered in detail. His gait, his clothes, the way he held the scepter. It was as though the whole city still lived under his eyes. Even dead, kings like him kept governing somehow, not by laws but by memory. And memory in that city was serious. It wasn't erased. It wasn't softened. It was carried like another brick in the walls he ordered raised. Near midnight, something strange happened. In the city center, close to the old palace, the torches all faltered at once. It wasn't wind, it wasn't rain. The sky was clear. Yet the flames simply shrank, as if smothered by something invisible. Guards looked at each other, residents barred doors, and for minutes no one moved. Time itself seemed frozen. Some elders fell to their knees without knowing why. Others whispered ancient prayers forgotten since the empire's fall. A thick silence covered the city like a curtain. Then, right in the square's center where ancient ceremonies once took place, a dry thud echoed, but nothing stood there. No explanation, no figure, only the sound. After that, the flames revived as though nothing had happened. No one spoke of it the rest of the night, but everyone heard, and everyone felt. Some said it was him. Others thought it was merely the weight of remembrance, demanding its price. It didn't matter. The day had been his from the start, and now ended the same way, with a silence that spoke more than any hymn or tablet record. The old retired with eyes fixed on the ground, and the young went to sleep filled with questions no one wanted to answer. The city still stood, yet something that day had changed, as if a door had closed, as if memory, for the first time, tired of being remembered. There was no proclamation, no conclusion, just the sudden end of something never fully understood. And, as so often during Nebuchadnezzar's reign, no one could say exactly what had happened, only that it had. Next morning, the city looked the same, but those who lived that day knew something had passed through. There were no visible traces, no decree, no new inscription, no temple announcement. Yet the gazes were different, more restrained, more alert. Streets were clean, markets running, the ziggurat casting its usual shadow. But it felt as if Babylon itself had taken a deep breath and now tried to move on, like someone waking from a heavy dream and preferring not to speak of it. Some avoided the Ishtar gate that day. Others left offerings on temple steps without explanation. And no one mentioned the previous night's sound. No one dared ask. Safer to pretend nothing occurred. But everyone knew. And so it ended. No spectacle, no prophecy, no answer. Just as Nebuchadnezzar appears in the records, like lightning crossing the sky and then vanishing, leaving only the thunder. The city, the bricks, the reliefs, the empty temple corridors, all still stood. But that feeling, that he was still there somehow, also remained. The man who defeated kings, toppled walls, and built wonders had died decades ago. Yet he was remembered as if he might return any moment. And perhaps that was his greatest work. Not the gardens, nor the gates, nor the victories, but the fact that, even absent, his presence still weighed. That day ended like every other, sun, rising in the east. But those who lived that specific day, who heard the stories, who felt the silence fall like a blanket, they never forgot, because no one ever understood what it was, only that it was real.